when I met her, had spent about 20 years not going out. She literally had walked to her front door once or twice, but couldn't cross the threshold of her front door. She could just about go into her back garden as long as she was still within reach of being able to touch the house, but she couldn't go any further into her own back garden. And her son had become ill and was in hospital. And so she suddenly decided, I need treatment, because up till then she'd used shopping companies that home deliver, and she'd been able to find a way around every single limitation that being trapped in your own home brings. But having a son in hospital meant she actually had to do something about it now. And so we had about an hour and a half long session. And by halfway through the session, we were sat on the seafront. She lived near the seafront. Sat on the seafront, first time in 20 years that she'd been down to the beach. It was a nice, hot, sunny summer's day. And we're eating ice cream, finishing the session, talking about, okay, so what are you going to do differently? How's life going to be different now that you can go out?
Prison officer who has been who came to see me after 6 months of experiencing this very traumatic incident at work. There was a hanging, and he was involved in taking this prisoner off the place where this all happened. And then ever since then, he had not been able to return to work because of the typical PTSD presentation with the flashbacks, nightmares, and severe anxiety, panic attacks, and he had a full-blown basically symptoms of all the PTSD. And he came to see me mainly because of his his work insurance wanted him to get help so he can return to work. We did rewind therapy. We did it, I think, after the second appointment he had with me, and very quickly after that, he became quite relaxed about talking about it. And I have to say that after about 2 months of involvement with me, he's now fully back at work.
Oh, that's fantastic.
So that's one that I've done.
That's fantastic.
That's yeah, it is. I'm very surprised, pleasantly surprised, I have to say. Yeah.
One would be a birth client I had. Came to see me with her she was in the third trimester with her third child. It had taken her 5.5 years before she could actually wanted to try to conceive again. And during her first session, I had to kind of deviate quite quickly because it was apparent just by mentioning the word birth, she was kind of starting to go into panic attack mode. So I finished that session up, and then in the next session used the rewind technique on her to go through the first two births. The first birth was post-birth complications, and the second birth was during birth complications, some really bad medical mishaps that shouldn't have happened as well. So she was just absolutely terrified at the prospect of giving birth. So we did this session, and the first child was about a 7 out of 10 on the, as worse as the anxiety can get scale, and the second birth was a 9 out of 10. So at the end of that, we've reduced them to a 5 and a 3 out of 10. And she had said up front she would be comfortable with a 5 or less, but didn't actually expect that much out of one session.
Right.
So up front she was kind of like, look, it's not going to reduce to, even a 5 would be amazing. So on her scaling, she was over the moon. And after that session, even her husband noticed massive differences in the way her outlook towards birth. And then obviously we were able to proceed with the normal birthing stuff I'd take them through. But for me, that was a real standout one because she was just so anxious about the whole prospect of birth, and also, it had taken her so long to actually get to the stage where she could even think about having the third child. And as soon as it got to the third trimester, she started freaking out.
Yeah.
And she was able to enjoy the rest of her pregnancy. And I don't think the usual techniques I used, if I hadn't resolved that particular level of intensity she still had around those past events, it could have gone terribly different. And she had her last baby with no pain relief.
from depression and anxiety due to early childhood trauma experiences. Two of the women were sexually and physically and emotionally abused by family members. The third client witnessed a horrible accident that her brother was in, which resulted in severe brain trauma for him. And they were very close, only a few years apart in age, and he was very successful, very promising, very intelligent young man, and had a great future ahead of him. And of course, the accident and the subsequent brain trauma pretty much robbed him of all of that. She was very tearful about that. So I used the rewind technique with all three subjects, and happy to report that all three are just have been able to move forward. The emotional states that were attached to those events have pretty much diminished, and they can talk about those events without the visceral and emotional response that they had in the past. Anxiety levels have dropped. Depression has improved. Of course, there's other things in their lives too that we're working on to really clean this up well for them. But the rewind technique it really works well, and I've had a lot of success with it.
I tend to attract clients generally with a history of very difficult upbringings, so quite a lot of childhood trauma, who I would usually say would be a long-term client with quite a bit of work ahead of them. And I have tried various other, techniques, parts, ego state therapy, various other things that are in my therapy toolkit. They were effective, but they weren't getting what I needed. And I always know, particularly with clients who have been in trauma, that even though I've given them a lot of opportunity to talk through the issues, they've felt validated, they've resolved a lot of stuff, it's almost like they're stuck in a loop that they keep going back to, that particular memory, particular events over and over again. So it was clear to me that even though they were making progress, the progress was by no means as effective as it could be.
A lady I worked with as well had a young child, and if the young child wanted to cuddle her or tickle her, she'd freak out, especially if the child's hands went near her neck. And it turned out that she'd had somebody attempt to strangle her. And so any time that there was any physical contact anywhere near her neck or that part of the body, she'd be back there in that situation again. And so using the rewind, we changed that experience for her, and then she was able to have cuddles with the little girl, have the little girl's hands and arms around her neck, and no problem at all. So those are just a few examples. I use it for all sorts of different things, from major to minor things and in different ways, but to help people to see incidents that have happened, but in a different way. So they still know that the thing has happened, but the emotional content is taken out of it.
A lot of what I do is weight loss. I've lost 100 pounds myself with the help of hypnosis, and that's kind of my niche. So I'm not seeking out people with post-traumatic stress or depression or anxiety, but about half of my clients that I see happen to have something in their past or present that is related to stress and anxiety and depression. And about half of them have benefited from the rewind technique. I have a couple of questions I ask to kind of see is there some issue or memory that's haunting or bothering or causing you to feel stressed, and if they come up with something and I ask them to scale it, it's just talking about it, telling me about it, how does that feel to you on a scale of 0 to 10? Is it making you anxious just talking about it? And if I get over a 5, then I go ahead and explain the rewind technique and do it.
Fantastic.
So this one woman recently, it's tax season, and she has to deal with her ex-husband every tax season to file her taxes. She has to get information from him and about their finances, obviously. And she's had some trauma with the divorce 20 years ago. And every tax season, she goes through this, just seeing an email from him, and her email causes her to start to panic and get upset. And so we went ahead and did the rewind on just the last 3 episodes of her being upset at being in contact with him. And the reason that came up was, she's overeating. When she's more stressed, she eats more. And that's kind of how that came up. And to be aware that there may be something like the rewind that we can do to help with that. And sure enough, now she reports she's just calmer. When she sees an email from him, it doesn't upset her. And she's able to calmly deal with whatever the situation is.
And that's really, really interesting because you spotted a traumatic element that could have easily been missed. Had you know. I mean, it's important not to blindly assume that someone has, is necessarily traumatized, but being open to the possibility and its possible connection to overeating or whatever it is really important, and you're able to do something about that really dramatically. It's fantastic.
Yeah, so I'm just thrilled with it, and the more I think about it, the more I think so many of our difficulties are probably related to some kind of trauma somewhere along the line that's caused us to maladaptively deal with stress or whatever. And I just wonder how different the world would be if everybody that could benefit from this kind of rewind technique were able to have access to it and benefit from it. How many less anti-anxiety pills would have?